The smoke rose black against the copper sky, twisting like a dying serpent above what remained of the Morrison homestead. Sarah Morrison stood motionless in the yard, her calico dress torn and soot-stained, watching the last of her father's barn collapse into embers. The acrid smell of burning wood and hay filled her nostrils, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere with her father and brother, who had left 3 days prior for Tucson to sell cattle, leaving her alone to tend the ranch. The Apache war party had struck at dawn, swift and merciless as a desert storm. Sarah had awakened to the thunder of hooves and war cries that sent ice through her veins. She'd grabbed her mother's old rifle, but there were too many, perhaps 20 warriors painted for war, their face fierce beneath the rising sun. They'd set fire to the barn first, then the storage shed, systematically destroying everything her family had built over 5 hard years in the Arizona territory. Now, as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and rust, she became aware of eyes upon her. A single Apache warrior sat astride a painted pony not 30 feet away, watching her with an intensity that should have frightened her more than it did. He was younger than she'd expected a war chief to be, perhaps 30 summers, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes that held none of the savage cruelty the newspapers always described. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle she'd dropped hours ago. But he made no threatening gesture, only walked toward her with the measured grace of a mountain cat. When he stopped before her, close enough that she could see the intricate beadwork on his war shirt, he spoke in accented but clear Spanish. "You will come with me tonight." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah understood Spanish well enough. Her mother had been from Sonora, but she'd never expected to hear it from Apache lips. She should have screamed, should have run, should have done anything but stand there meeting his dark gaze. Instead, she found herself studying the sharp planes of his face, the way his hair fell loose past his shoulders, the quiet authority in his bearing. "I saw you," he continued when she didn't respond. "When we came, you did not run. You stood with your rifle, ready to die protecting this place. But when the fire started in the house, you ran inside. Not for money or jewels, I watched. You saved books. Why?" Sarah's throat felt dry as desert sand. "They were my mother's," she managed. "Her books of poetry. From Mexico." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been understanding. "And when Broken Arrow knocked you down, when he raised his club, you spoke. Do you remember what you said?" She remembered. In that moment of certain death, a word had escaped her lips, unbidden, a word learned from an old Apache woman who sometimes traded at the settlement. "Shima," she whispered. "Mother." "Yes." His voice was softer now, though no less commanding. "You called for your mother in my language. Broken Arrow's own mother died last winter. He could not strike you after that." The chief, for surely that's what he was, circled her slowly, like a buyer examining a horse, but his gaze held curiosity more than possession. "I am called Grey Wolf by your people. My true name is Chenchuk. I lead what remains of my band. Disease and bullets have taken many. We need women who are strong, who can survive what comes." "You're taking me captive." It wasn't a question. "I am asking you to come." The distinction seemed important to him. "Your ranch is destroyed. When your men return, they will find nothing but ashes. They will think you dead. Perhaps that is better." Better. Anger flared in her chest. "Better to be a slave to the people who destroyed my home." His jaw tightened. "Not a slave. Never a slave. My woman. If you choose, if you say no, if you refuse me tonight or any night, I will not force you. This is my word, and my word is iron." Sarah studied him. This Apache warrior who spoke of choice while her home smoldered behind her. She thought of her life here, the isolation, the endless work, the marriage her father had been arranging with a banker's son in Tucson, a boy with soft hands and cruel eyes who looked at her like property already bought. Why me? She asked. Because you are different. Because you saved books instead of gold. Because you spoke our language in your last moment. Because... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I am tired of taking. I want something chosen, something given freely. The other warriors had gathered at a distance, watching their chief with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Sarah knew she stood at a crossroads, not just between two peoples, but between two versions of herself. The dutiful daughter who would wait here for her father's return, who would marry the banker's boy and bear his children in a proper house with lace curtains. Or, if I come, she said slowly, what then? Then you learn our ways. You work alongside our women. You eat what we eat, sleep where we sleep. If the soldiers come, you run with us. If we starve, you starve with us. But you will be treated with respect. Any who dishonors you dishonors me. And if I want to leave, then you leave. But not tonight. Tonight, you decide only whether to come. The rest. He gestured toward the vast desert stretching endlessly before them. The rest we discover as we go. Sarah looked back at the ruins of her home, then at the books she'd saved lying in the dust, her mother's treasures. The only things she'd thought worth risking her life for. Her mother, who'd scandalized proper society by marrying an American rancher, who'd read her Lorca and Becker by lamplight, who'd died bringing another child into the world 3 winters past. What would you have done if I'd said no immediately? Chenchuch Grey Wolf almost smiled. Ridden away. Found another way to save my people. But I hoped. Hoped what? That a woman who saves poetry from flames might understand a people trying to save their songs from silence. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust. And Sarah felt something inside her shift with it. She thought of all the proper white women in their proper white houses, clucking their tongues at her mother's memory. Thought of the banker's son and his possessive leer. Thought of a life measured in tea services and social calls, her spirit slowly suffocating in whalebone corsets. She looked down at her hands, strong hands, calloused from work, trembling now with the magnitude of what she was about to do. Then she raised her eyes to meet his, and in them saw not a savage warrior, but a man offering her something her own world never had a choice. I'll need to gather some things, she said quietly. Chenchuch nodded once, solemnly, as if a sacred pact had been sealed. Be quick, we ride before the sun reaches its peak. As Sarah moved toward the scattered remnants of her life, she heard him speak to his warriors in Apache. She didn't understand the words, but she heard her name, or what would become her name among them. Nada, the one who saves books, the keeper of words. She packed quickly, methodically, her mother's books, a change of clothes, her grandmother's sewing kit, the small pouch of herbs she used for healing, practical things for an impractical choice. When she emerged, Chenchuch had brought forward a spare pony, smaller than his war horse, but sturdy, with intelligent eyes. Can you ride? Better than most men, she answered truthfully. This time he did smile, a quick flash of approval. Good, we have far to go. As she mounted the pony, Sarah caught sight of herself in a broken piece of mirror lying in the yard. Wild hair, smoke-stained face, eyes bright with something that might have been madness or might have been the first stirring of freedom. She hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. The war party began to move, and Chenchuch brought his mount alongside hers. You are afraid, he observed. Yes, but you come anyway. My mother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. Your mother was wise. She was from Sonora. She understood what it meant to be caught between worlds. They rode in silence for a moment before he spoke again. You have not asked my terms, what I want from you. Sarah kept her eyes on the horizon. You said you wanted something freely given. That tells me more than any terms could. Behind them, the smoke from the Morrison ranch grew fainter, until it was just another smudge against the vast canvas of the sky. Sarah didn't look back. She'd made her choice in that moment of silence after he'd spoken, in the space between his words and her unspoken answer. Whatever lay ahead, hardship. Certainly, danger, probably. Regret. Possibly she would meet it with eyes open, as the sun climbed toward its zenith and the desert shimmered with heat. Sarah Morrison rode toward a new life, leaving behind everything she'd known for a future as uncertain as the shifting sands. But for the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly alive, truly present in her own skin. The Apache called her Nada, keeper of words. She would need all the words she could gather, in all the languages she knew, to write this new chapter of her life. The Apache camp lay hidden in a narrow canyon, its entrance so cleverly concealed that Sarah would have ridden past it entirely had Chenchuk not guided her through a passage between two towering rocks. As they emerged on the other side, she caught her breath. Perhaps 40 people, mostly women and children, moved about their daily tasks among brush shelters and small cooking fires. It was far fewer than she'd expected, and the reality of Chenchuk's words about his diminished band struck her with new force. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women stopped grinding corn. Children froze mid-play, and the few men present reached instinctively for weapons before recognizing their chief. But it was the expression on their faces when they saw Sarah that made her stomach clench surprise, suspicion, and in some cases, open hostility. An older woman emerged from the largest shelter, her face weathered but regal, silver threading through her still dark hair. She moved with the authority of one used to being obeyed, and Sarah knew immediately this must be Chenchuk's mother. The woman's eyes, the same penetrating dark as her son's, fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her want to shrink into her saddle. The rapid exchange in Apache that followed needed no translation. The mother's tone was sharp, accusatory. Chenchuk's responses were measured but firm. Other women gathered, their voices rising in what was clearly protest. Sarah caught her own name, or rather, the name they'd given her. Nadaya spoken with varying degrees of skepticism. Finally, Chenchuk raised his hand for silence. He spoke at length, his voice carrying the authority of leadership. And though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she heard the conviction in them. When he finished, he turned to her and spoke in Spanish, loud enough for all to hear. "Tell them why you came." Sarah dismounted slowly, aware of every eye upon her. Her legs trembled from the long ride, but she forced herself to stand straight. When she spoke, it was in Spanish, knowing some would understand. "I chose to come. No one forced me. No one dragged me. I chose." She paused, searching for words that might bridge the chasm between them. "My mother was from Sonora. She taught me that there are many ways to be strong, many ways to live. When your son asked me to come, I could have refused. I came because," she faltered, then found her truth, "because I was already a captive in my own world. At least here, I was given a choice." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Chenchuk's mother stepped forward. "I am Itzachu," she said in accented English. "You say you chose. We shall see if you choose to stay when you know what choice means here." She gestured sharply, and 2 younger women approached. "You will work. You will learn. You will earn your place or you will leave. My son may lead this band, but the women decide who belongs. Do you understand?" "I understand," Sarah replied. "Good. Then you start now. Nadza and Kewin will show you where you sleep, where you work. You know nothing, so you will do as they say. Perhaps in time, you will know something, perhaps not." The 2 women, Nadza, round-faced and perhaps Sarah's age, and Kewin, older with a scar across her left cheek, led her to a small shelter at the edge of the camp. It was barely large enough for 2 people, made of bent saplings covered with hides and brush. Inside, A worn blanket lay on the ground next to baskets of dried plants Sarah couldn't identify. "You sleep here," Kaywin said in halting English. "Work starts before sun. You miss work, you no eat." As they showed her where to find water, where to gather wood, where waste was disposed of, Sarah began to understand the precarious nature of the camp's existence. Everything was designed to be abandoned at a moment's notice. These people lived constantly ready to flee, to disappear into the landscape like smoke. That first night, Chenchush didn't come to her. Sarah lay on the thin blanket, staring up through gaps in the shelter at unfamiliar stars, wondering if she'd misunderstood his intentions. Around her, the camp settled into sleep, but she remained wakeful, alert to every sound, the call of night birds, the distant yip of coyotes, the soft breathing of someone in the shelter beside hers. When a figure finally appeared in her doorway, silhouetted against the dying embers of the camp's fires, her heart hammered against her ribs, but Chenchuk merely sat at the entrance, not entering, his voice low when he spoke. "You did well today. Itzachu, my mother, she is hard, but fair. She has seen too many of our people die to trust easily. She doesn't want me here." "No, but she respects courage. Show her yours, and she may change her mind." They sat in silence for a moment before he continued. "I had a wife once, Daza Hai. She died 3 winters ago, along with our son. Sickness that came from the reservation. Many died." His voice carried old pain, weathered but not forgotten. "I swore I would not take another wife, but our band grows smaller each season. We need children, or we will disappear entirely." "Is that why you brought me to bear children?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I brought you because when I saw you save those books, I thought here is someone who understands that some things matter more than life. My people's stories, our songs, our ways, they matter more than any one life. But they need new voices to carry them forward, or they die with us." Sarah pulled her knees to her chest. "I don't know your stories. You will learn. If you choose to stay." He shifted, and she could just make out his profile in the darkness. "I will tell you something of my life, and you will tell me of yours. This is how we begin." Through the dark hours before dawn, they talked. He told her of his childhood, racing horses across the plains before the white soldiers came in numbers. Of his first raid at 14, the pride and terror of it. Of meeting Daza Hai at a trading gathering, how she'd laughed at his attempts to impress her. Of watching his father die fighting soldiers. Of taking leadership of what remained of their band too young, with too little wisdom. In return, Sarah told him of her mother's stories of Sonora, of learning to read from her mother's books of poetry, of her father's disappointment that she wasn't a son, her brother's casual dismissal of her thoughts and dreams, of the loneliness of the ranch, the endless sameness of days, the slow realization that she was being shaped for a life she didn't want. "Your mother's books," Chenchuk said as the eastern sky began to lighten. "What did they say that mattered so much?" Sarah thought of Becker's rhymes, of Lorca's images of death and desire. They spoke of love and loss, of choosing your own path even when it leads to sorrow. They said that to live without passion is not to live at all. "Then your mother's people and mine understand each other. We say it is better to die on your feet than live on your knees." As the camp began to stir, he rose to leave. "The women will work you hard. Some will be cruel. Do not respond with anger. Show them your strength through endurance." And Sarah, it was the first time he'd used her white name. "Remember that you chose this. When it becomes difficult, remember why." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and learning. Sarah's hands, already calloused from ranch work, developed new blisters from grinding corn with stone tools, from scraping hides, from gathering thorny plants for food and medicine. Nadza proved a patient teacher, showing her which roots were edible, which plants healed, which could kill. Kaywin remained suspicious, quick to criticize. But Sarah sensed grief beneath her harshness. She'd lost 2 daughters to soldier bullets. The children were the first to accept her. Curious about her light hair and pale skin, they would creep close when she worked, giggling when she attempted Apache words. She learned their names Taza, Nitis, Little Crow, and began teaching them Spanish words in return, creating a game of language that made even some of the women smile. Chenchuk came to her shelter each night, always sitting at the entrance, never presuming more. They continued their exchange of stories, building understanding word by word. She learned that he'd studied at a mission school briefly as a child, which explained his Spanish. He'd hated it, but acknowledged the power of knowing the enemy's language. "Is that what I am?" she asked one night. "The enemy?" "You were born to people who are our enemies, but you, yourself, that remains to be seen." By the second week, Sarah had established a rhythm. Rise before dawn, help prepare the morning meal, work at whatever tasks the women assigned, rest briefly in the afternoon's worst heat, then more work until dark. Her body adapted, growing leaner and harder. Her skin darkened under the desert sun. She began to understand simple Apache phrases, to move with something approaching the other women's efficiency. It was Itza-Chu who finally signaled acceptance. In her own way, Sarah was struggling with a particularly tough hide when the older woman approached. "You do it wrong," she said bluntly, taking the scraping tool from Sarah's bleeding hands. "Like this, use the weight of your body, not just arms." As she demonstrated, she added quietly, "You have not complained. This is good. Complaining changes nothing." She handed the tool back. "My son sees something in you. Perhaps he is right, perhaps not. Time will show." That night, Chenchuk smiled when Sarah told him of his mother's instruction. "She begins to soften. This is rare. Your mother is formidable. She has had to be. She has buried a husband and 3 children. She leads the women as I lead the band. Without her strength, we would have scattered long ago." "And what of your strength?" Sarah asked. "Emboldened by darkness. What holds you here when you could disappear into Mexico? Live free. This land is our blood," he said simply. "Every mountain knows our names. Every stream carries our stories. To leave is to die in a different way." He paused. "But perhaps there is another path. One that preserves what matters while adapting to what cannot be changed." "What do you mean?" "You will see, if you stay." The next morning brought a test Sarah hadn't anticipated. A hunting party returned with disturbing news. Soldier patrols had been spotted 2 days' ride to the south, moving steadily north. The camp erupted in controlled chaos as preparations began for potential flight. Sarah found herself caught in the swirl of activity, helping to pack essential supplies, learning how quickly a home could become a burden to be abandoned. But as she worked alongside the other women, she realized something had shifted. They no longer watched her with suspicion. Kaywin even showed her how to pack medicines to prevent damage, while Nadza trusted her to prepare travel food. That evening, as the camp waited in tense readiness, Chenchush came to her openly for the first time, sitting beside her at the communal fire. "If we must run, you will ride with the women and children. Stay close to Nadza. If soldiers come..." He handed her a knife, its blade sharp and well-balanced. "This is for protection, but also for choice. Some things are worse than death. Each person must decide for themselves what those things are." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. She took the knife, its weight both foreign and strangely comforting in her hand. Around them, the people prepared for what might come with the practiced efficiency of those who'd fled before and would flee again. But the soldiers didn't come. Scouts reported they'd turned east, following some other trail. The camp slowly relaxed, though everything remained packed for quick departure. That night, for the first time, Chenchuk entered her shelter. The new moon ceremony came without warning to Sarah. She woke to find the camp transformed. women painting their faces with red ochre and white clay, men preparing drums from hidden caches. Nadza appeared at her shelter with a bundle of clothes, a doeskin dress decorated with beads and shells, moccasins softer than anything Sarah had ever worn. "Tonight is sacred," Nadza explained as she helped Sarah dress. "New moon, new beginnings. The spirits decide who belongs and who does not." Sarah's hands trembled as Nadza braided her hair with eagle feathers and turquoise beads. "What must I do?" "Listen, watch. When the time comes, you will know." As darkness fell, the entire band gathered in a natural amphitheater formed by the canyon walls. A great fire blazed at the center, sending sparks spiraling toward the stars. The drums began, a heartbeat rhythm that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Chenchuk sat with the other men, his face painted with symbols Sarah couldn't read, but his eyes found hers across the flames. Itza Chu rose first, her voice lifting in a chant that the other women soon joined. The words were beyond Sarah's limited Apache, but the emotion transcended language grief. Hope, defiance, and joy woven together like strands of a rope. One by one, people rose to dance, their movements telling stories of hunts and wars, of loves found and lost, of children born and elders passed. When Kaywin pulled Sarah to her feet, she resisted. "I don't know the steps." "There are no steps," Kaywin said, and for the first time she smiled. "Only truth." Sarah found herself moving with the others, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. The drums seemed to pulse in her blood, the chance to draw something wild from deep within her chest. She thought of her mother dancing at Mexican festivals, how her father had disapproved, calling it unseemly. But there was nothing unseemly here, only life, raw and honest and beautiful. Hours passed like minutes. Sarah's world narrowed to the fire, the drums, the press of bodies moving in ancient patterns. When Chenchuk finally rose and moved toward her through the dancers, she felt as if she'd been waiting for this moment all her life. He held out his hand. She took it. The drums shifted rhythm, and the dancers formed a circle around them. Chenchuk spoke in Apache, his voice carrying over the music. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she heard her name, both names. Nada and Sarah woven through what was clearly a declaration. Itza Chu stepped forward with a blanket, beautifully woven with patterns of mountains and rivers. She spoke too, her weathered face solemn. Then she placed the blanket around both their shoulders, and the band erupted in celebration. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered to Chenchuk as people pressed forward to touch them, to offer blessings she couldn't understand. "You became my wife," he said simply, "and I became your husband. If you accept." Sarah's heart hammered. "You should have asked." "I am asking now, in front of my people, with the spirits as witness. Will you have me, Sarah Morrison, who is Nadaya? Will you walk this path with me, wherever it leads?" She looked around at the faces lit by firelight, Nadza grinning, Kaywin nodding approval. Even Itza Chu's stern features softened by something that might have been affection. These people who had been strangers mere weeks ago now waited for her answer as if it mattered, as if she mattered. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The celebration continued until dawn, but Chenchuk eventually led her away from the fire to a shelter she hadn't seen before, larger than her old one, with thick buffalo robes and baskets already arranged inside. Their marriage shelter, she realized, prepared in secret. Inside, by the light of a small oil lamp, Chenchush's painted face looked almost otherworldly, but his hands were gentle as he unpinned her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. "Are you afraid?" he asked, echoing his question from that first day. "No," Sarah said, and found it was true. "Not of you, not of this." What followed was patient and tender, a conversation of touch and breath and discovery. Chenchuk was careful with her, attentive to her responses. and Sarah found herself opening like a flower to sun, her body singing with sensations she'd never imagined. When they finally lay quiet in each other's arms, she understood why her mother's poetry spoke so often of desire. It was its own language, its own form of truth. The weeks that followed were the happiest Sarah had ever known. As Chenchuk's wife, her status in the band shifted. She was given more responsibilities, but also more respect. Itzachu began teaching her the medicinal properties of plants, a knowledge usually passed from mother to daughter. The other women included her in their gossip and jokes, their private women's ceremonies. Chenchush taught her to shoot not just rifles, which she already knew, but the bow, requiring a different kind of strength and patience. He showed her how to read the land like a book, to find water where none seemed to exist, to move silently through terrain that appeared impassable. "You learn quickly," he told her one afternoon as she successfully brought down a rabbit with her third arrow. "Perhaps there is Apache blood in you already." "My mother always said we had Indian blood from long ago," Sarah admitted. "She never said from which people." "All blood is mixed if you go back far enough. What matters is the heart. And yours." He touched her chest gently. "Your heart is learning to be Apache." But even in happiness, shadow lurked at the edges. Scouts brought increasingly dire reports, more soldiers, more settlers, the inexorable press of civilization into their desert sanctuary. Other Apache bands had been forced onto reservations or had fled to Mexico. Their small group couldn't remain hidden forever. It was on a morning when the cottonwoods showed the first gold of autumn that Sarah knew. She'd been tired lately, her stomach uncertain, but had attributed it to the change in diet. When she vomited her morning meal for the third day running, Nadza gave her a knowing look. "How long since your moon blood?" Sarah counted back, realizing with a start that she'd missed 2 cycles. Nadza grinned and called for Itzachu, who came with her medicine bundle and examining hands. "A child," the older woman pronounced after her investigation. "Growing well. Spring baby, if all goes right." Her dark eyes studied Sarah intently. "This is what you want?" "Yes," Sarah breathed, hand moving instinctively to her still flat belly. "Yes." When Chenchuk learned the news, his joy was tempered with worry. He held her close, his hand joining hers over the promise of new life, but she felt the tension in his body. "I should take you away," he murmured. "Somewhere safer." "There is nowhere safer. We both know this." He was quiet for a long moment. "There is a place in the Sierra Madre, across the border. Other bands have gone there. The Mexicans leave them alone. Mostly, we could—" "Your mother would never leave. Half the band wouldn't leave. This is your land." "Our land," he corrected. "But what good is land to a dead child?" It was the beginning of a debate that would continue through the winter months as Sarah's belly grew round and the band celebrated the promise of new life. Children were rare now, precious as water in drought. The women fussed over her, making special foods to ease her sickness, sewing tiny clothes from the softest hides. Chenchuk became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from any work he deemed too strenuous. Sarah, who had never been coddled in her life, found it equal parts endearing and infuriating. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him in exasperation one day when he tried to stop her from helping to butcher an elk. "Apache women have been having babies while working for thousands of years." "Apache women haven't been my wife," he countered, which made the other women laugh and tease him for being soft. But the laughter couldn't mask the growing danger. Winter brought not snow but soldiers, their patrols increasing, their searches more systematic. The band moved camp 3 times in 2 months, each time with greater difficulty as Sarah's pregnancy advanced. It was during the 3rd move that she felt the baby quicken for the first time, a flutter like bird wings against her ribs. She gasped, pressing both hands to her belly, and Chenchuk was beside her instantly. "Here," she guided his hand to the spot. "Feel." His eyes widened as the baby moved again. Stronger this time. A warrior, he said softly. Already fighting. Or a girl who takes after her grandmother, Sarah countered, glancing at Itzachu, who pretended not to be watching. That night, in their shelter, Chenchuk sang to her belly old songs, creation stories, lullabies his own mother had sung. Sarah dozed to the sound of his voice, feeling safer than she had any right to feel. She dreamed of a child with dark hair and light eyes, running free across a land without borders, speaking all languages and belonging to all peoples. A bridge, she thought on waking. Their child would be a bridge, if they could keep it alive long enough to become one. Spring came early to the desert, and with it, a fragile hope. The soldiers had pulled back, distracted by troubles elsewhere. The band found a good camping spot near a reliable spring, and for a few weeks, life felt almost normal. Sarah, now heavily pregnant, had fully integrated into the rhythms of Apache life. She could identify edible plants by sight, prepare a deer hide for tanning, and speak enough Apache to understand most conversations. More importantly, she had found her place in the web of relationships that held the band together. She was teaching some of the children to read using charcoal on flat stones when the first labor pain struck. It was like lightning through her belly, stealing her breath. Little Crow looked up at her with concern. "Auntie's sick." "No, little one. The baby is coming." The boy ran for help, and soon Sarah was surrounded by women. Itzachu taking charge with the authority of one who had delivered dozens of babies. They helped her to the birthing shelter, a special place prepared days ago, and settled her on soft furs. "Now we see your strength," Itzachu said, but her tone was kind. "Apache babies come when they choose. You must be patient." Patient was the last thing Sarah felt as the contractions intensified. She'd helped with calving on the ranch, but this was different. This was her body being remade from the inside out. Chenchuk paced outside like a caged mountain cat, forbidden by custom from entering until the baby arrived. The dawn came like any other, rose-gold light spilling across the canyon walls while morning birds called their territories. Sarah knelt by the grinding stones, working corn into meal for the morning cakes, her belly now round with 6 months of pregnancy. The repetitive motion soothed her, as did the quiet chatter of women around her. She'd learned to find peace in these simple moments, the cool morning air, the sound of children playing, the smell of piñon smoke from the fires. The first gunshot shattered that peace like a stone through glass. For a heartbeat, the camp froze, then chaos erupted. Women grabbed children, men dove for weapons, and the air filled with the thunder of cavalry horses crashing through their hidden sanctuary. Sarah's mind couldn't process how they'd been found their scouts. Their careful movements, their secret paths all useless now against the blue-coated tide pouring into the canyon. "Run!" Itzachu's voice cut through the panic. The older woman grabbed Sarah's arm with surprising strength. The caves protect the child. But there was nowhere to run. Soldiers seemed to pour from every direction, their Spencer repeating rifles cracking like deadly thunder. Sarah saw Kewin fall, red blooming across her chest. Saw little Taza trying to wake his motionless mother. Saw chaos and death painting the morning in colors that would haunt her forever. A rifle butt caught her shoulder, spinning her to the ground. Pain exploded through her body as she instinctively curled around her belly, trying to protect the life within. Through the dust and gun smoke, she searched desperately for Chenchuk, catching glimpses of him fighting with deadly grace, his rifle speaking death to any soldier who came too close. Then their eyes met across the battlefield. Time seemed to slow as she saw his decision written on his face, the terrible choice between fighting and reaching her. He turned his horse, spurring toward her, and she saw the soldiers tracking his movement, raising their rifles. "No!" The word tore from her throat as she struggled to rise. "Chenchuch!" He almost made it. His horse leaped fallen bodies and cooking fires, hooves striking sparks from stone. 20 feet, 10, close enough that she could see the determination in his eyes, the love and desperation mixed in equal measure. The volley of shots seemed to go on forever. Sarah watched in horror as the bullets struck 1, 5, 10, more. Chenchuk's body jerked with each impact, but still he rode. Still he reached for her, until his horse screamed and fell, taking him down in a tangle of limbs. "No, no, no!" Sarah crawled toward him, heedless of the battle raging around her. But strong hands seized her arms, dragging her back. She fought like a wildcat, screaming his name, but the world was already graying at the edges, darkness creeping in from the corners of her vision. The last thing she saw was Chenchuk trying to rise, blood pooling beneath him, still trying to reach her as more soldiers surrounded him. 23 shots, she would learn later. It had taken 23 bullets to stop him. Then darkness claimed her. She woke in hell, or what the army called a field hospital. Canvas walls, the stench of blood and carbolic, the moans of wounded soldiers mixing with her own people's silence. An army doctor with kind eyes and blood-stained hands was examining her, speaking words that wouldn't quite form meaning in her mind. "You're safe now. Miss, the savages can't hurt you anymore. Though I'm afraid—" His face creased with what might have been sympathy. "The child, the trauma was too much. I'm sorry." "Child!" Her hands flew to her belly, still swollen but somehow different, somehow empty. The keening sound that emerged from her throat wasn't quite human. The doctor stepped back, calling for laudanum. But Sarah was beyond the reach of any medicine that could touch this pain. "Where is he?" She grabbed the doctor's coat with desperate hands. "Chenchuk, Grey Wolf the chief. Where is he?" "The Apache leader dead, miskilled, trying to attack our position." The lie came so easily to his lips. "You're safe now. Your father is on his way from Tucson. You'll be home soon." Home? The word meant nothing. Home was Chenchuk's arms. Home was the sound of Apache women singing. Home was the child who would never draw breath. The bridge who would never be built. They kept her sedated for days, possibly weeks. Time became elastic, meaningless. She surfaced occasionally to find her father's face hovering above her, weathered and worried, speaking words about strength and survival and forgetting, as if she could forget, as if she wanted to. The journey to Tucson passed in a haze. Sarah was vaguely aware of being lifted into a wagon, of her father's attempts at comfort, of the way soldiers averted their eyes from her face. She heard them whispering found with the savages. Poor thing. Months of captivity. Lucky to be alive. They'd already written her story for her, casting her as the victim in their narrative of rescue and civilization. She tried once to correct them. "I wasn't a captive. I was his wife. I chose—" Her father's hand covered her mouth, gentle but firm. "Hush now. Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. The doctor said the trauma. Just rest. We'll be home soon." Home was a house in Tucson that felt like a tomb. Her father had prospered in her absence. The ranch sold. A new business in town. He installed her in a room with lace curtains and a soft bed that felt like drowning. Neighbor women came to visit, their eyes bright with horrified curiosity, speaking in hushed tones about her ordeal. Sarah learned quickly that the truth was unwelcome. When she spoke of choosing to go with Chenchuk, of loving him, of carrying his child, faces would close like slammed doors. The doctor was called. More laudanum prescribed. Poor thing, they whispered. The savages had broken her mind along with her body. So she learned to lie, to nod when they spoke of her captivity, to let tears fall when they patted her hand and spoke of her strength in surviving, to play the role of the rescued maiden, broken but grateful. All the while, she felt the second child, the one they didn't know about, growing within her. Chenchuk's final gift, her secret rebellion against their carefully constructed story. The banker's son, Thomas Hartley, still wanted to marry her. This was presented as a great kindness. his willingness to overlook her unfortunate experience. Sarah sat through their chaperoned visits, watching this soft man speak of his plans for their future while she counted the weeks of her hidden pregnancy, made plans of her own. "You're so quiet," Thomas would say, mistaking her silence for feminine modesty rather than the screaming revolt it truly was. But that's proper for a lady who's endured such trials. Trials. As if love could be called a trial. As if choosing her own path was something to endure rather than embrace. Sarah became an expert at deception, claimed feminine troubles to explain her growing thickness, wore concealing clothes, played at increasing frailty to avoid social gatherings. She stole money from her father's cash box, a little at a time, hiding it with the few treasures she'd managed to keep her mother's poetry books. A beaded necklace Nadza had made for her. A small piece of turquoise Chenchuk had given her the day they knew about the first child. At night, she would lie in her soft bed and speak to the baby in whispers Apache words, Spanish endearments, English promises. "You will know who you are," she swore. "You will know your father's name, your people's stories. I swear this on everything sacred." Her father began to speak of setting a wedding date. Thomas grew bolder in his possessive glances. The walls of her prison grew tighter each day. And still the baby grew. A secret flame keeping her alive in a world that wanted her dead to everything true about herself. The breaking point came when she felt the quickening, that flutter of life that meant the child had taken firm root. She was in the parlor, enduring another of Thomas's visits, when the baby moved. Her gasp of joy was mistaken for pain, and in the fussing that followed smelling salts, cool cloths, worried murmurs, she saw her future stretching before her, a lifetime of lies, of hiding, of betraying everything Chenchuk had died trying to protect. That night, she gathered her hidden cash money, her mother's books, a change of clothes, the knife Chenchuk had given her still sharp in its hidden sheath. She left a note for her father, simple and direct. "I am not who you need me to be. Do not look for me." The desert welcomed her back like a prodigal daughter. Sarah had learned well from her Apache family how to move unseen, how to find water, how to survive on the land's harsh gifts. She traveled by night, slept in hidden places by day, moving steadily south toward the mountains that had always meant sanctuary. She nearly didn't make it. The fourth night, exhaustion and pregnancy caught up with her. She collapsed beside a small spring, her body finally rebelling against the demands she'd placed upon it. It was there that Miguel Morales found her an old shepherd who asked no questions about a pregnant white woman traveling alone, only helped her to his small cabin and called for his wife. Maria Morales took one look at Sarah and understood everything that mattered. "Apache," she said. Not a question, but recognition. "The child's father." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Too tired to lie anymore." "Then we help." "My grandmother was Apache, taken young, made Mexican. But the blood remembers. Sigh." They kept her through the worst of it, false contractions that threatened early labor, dehydration that left her weak as a newborn colt when she was strong enough to travel. They sent her higher into the mountains with supplies and directions to a village where questions weren't asked and pasts could be buried like seeds, waiting for the right season to grow into something new. Sarah arrived at the mountain village as the first snows began to fall. She had just enough money left to rent a small adobe house at the edge of town. When the curious came calling, she introduced herself as Sarah Delgado, widow of a Mexican rancher killed by bandits. The fiction came easily now she'd learned that survival sometimes required strategic lies. The women of the village, wise in the ways of female sorrow, recognized a sister in suffering. They helped her prepare for the birth, sharing remedies and advice, never questioning why she sometimes woke screaming a name that wasn't the Mexican husband she'd invented. Winter deepened, and Sarah's body grew heavy with promise. She spent the cold evenings by her small fire, reading her mother's poetry aloud to her belly, mixing Spanish verses with Apache lullabies, creating a new language for a child who would belong to many worlds. Your father named the stars for me once. She would whisper, each one had a story. You'll know them all. I promise. Every star, every story, every truth they tried to steal from us. The labor pains began during a spring storm, rain lashing the adobe walls while thunder rolled across the mountains like war drums. Sarah had sent for Elena, the village midwife, but the storm had washed out the mountain paths. She was alone with the fury of nature and the greater fury of her own body demanding to complete what it had begun. She'd prepared as best she could clean cloths, boiled water. The knife Chenchuk had given her sterilized and ready, between contractions. She laughed at the bitter irony. She'd survived an army massacre, the loss of her first child, months of imprisonment in her father's house, and an escape across the desert. Now she might die bringing Chenchuk's child into the world with only the storm as witness. Not today, she growled through gritted teeth. Remembering Itza Chu's teachings about birth, the old woman had insisted Sarah learn. Even though tradition usually kept such knowledge from first-time mothers. Pain is the pathway. She'd said, fear is the enemy. Your body knows the ancient dance. Sarah let her body lead, moving as instinct demanded, squatting, kneeling, pacing the small room like the mountain cats Chenchuk had compared her to. The storm raged louder, but she roared back, claiming her power in the primitive song of birth. When the baby finally came, slipping into her waiting hands in a rush of blood and water, the storm broke. Sudden silence fell, broken only by the thin, fierce cry of new life. Sarah lifted her son, for she saw immediately it was a son, and looked into eyes that were purely Chenchuk's, dark and knowing and perfect. Samuel, she whispered, the Anglo name she'd chosen for the world. Then, in Apache, Tsachowa, little warrior, your name is Samuel Kuruk Morrison, and you are the son of chiefs. Elena arrived with the dawn, finding Sarah and the baby cleaned and resting, the evidence of solitary birth already dealt with. The old woman checked them both with experienced hands, pronouncing them remarkably healthy. You have the strength of the mountain women, Elena said approvingly. This one will be strong like his mother. Sarah looked down at her son, nursing with determined concentration, and made a silent promise. He would know strength, yes, but he would also know the truth of who he was, no matter what lies the world demanded she tell. The early months were harder than anything Sarah had endured. Not the physical challenges, she'd learned privation in the Apache camp, but the constant vigilance required to protect their secret while ensuring her son survived. She took in washing and mending to earn money, her hands raw from lye soap, back aching from bending over washboards. When Samuel cried from hunger because her milk wasn't enough, she swallowed her pride and begged credit from the general store. The village women helped when they could, respecting her story of widowhood while recognizing the deeper truths written in her son's features. Indigenous blood, they would murmur. But in these mountains where Apache and Mexican bloodlines had tangled for generations, it wasn't unusual. They taught her which wild plants could supplement her milk, which herbs would soothe his colicky nights. Sarah became an expert at small deceptions. When Samuel's first word was in Apache ama for water, she quickly taught him the Spanish agua to cover. When he moved with a peculiar grace she remembered in Chenchuk, she attributed it to mountain living. When his eyes tracked things others couldn't see, she called it imagination rather than the heightened awareness of a people who'd survived by reading sign. At night, though, in the privacy of their small home, she gave him truth, stories of his father's courage, songs in Apache that she'd memorized during her time with the band. She taught him to move silently, to read the weather and cloud formations, to know which plants healed and which harmed, all the things Chenchuk would have taught him, filtered through her imperfect but determined memory. Your father could call eagles from the sky, she would tell him. He could find water in the driest desert. He chose to die protecting us rather than live without honor. Samuel absorbed it all with those serious dark eyes, as if he understood the weight of legacy being placed on his small shoulders. By the time he was 3, walking with steady purpose and chattering in a mix of languages, Sarah had established herself as more than just another widow. Her knowledge of healing plants, learned from Itza Chu, had spread through the village. Women came to her for remedies the local curandera didn't know, Apache treatments that worked when nothing else would. She was teaching Samuel to identify medicinal plants in their small garden when Doña Carmen, the wealthiest woman in the village, arrived with her grandson. The boy, about Samuel's age, had a persistent cough that had resisted all treatment. Sarah recognized the symptoms. She'd seen similar cases in the Apache camp. "Desert tea," she said, switching to her careful Spanish, but prepared the old way, with prayers to the 4 directions. Doña Carmen's eyes sharpened. "You know the indigenous ways." "My late husband's grandmother," Sarah said smoothly, the lie worn comfortable by repetition. "She taught me before she died." The tea worked, as Sarah had known it would. Word spread. Soon she had a steady stream of patients, enough income to move to a better house, to buy books for Samuel, to build something resembling a life. But at night, the ghosts came. Chen Chush's face in the moment before the bullet struck, the first baby she'd lost. Who would have been walking now, talking, playing with their brother? Kaywin falling, little Taza trying to wake his mother. The whole band scattered or dead, their story silenced. "Tell me about father," Samuel would demand, sensing her sorrow. So she would tell him, about courage and choice, about love that transcended boundaries, about a people who'd fought to remain free until the very end. She taught him to be proud of all his heritage, the Apache strength, the Mexican resilience, even the Anglo adaptability that allowed them to survive in a world hostile to their truth. The seasons turned, and Samuel grew like a desert wildflower, tough, beautiful, surprising. His intelligence blazed bright, absorbing languages like drought-cracked earth absorbs rain. By 5, he could read in Spanish and English, could track rabbits through the piñon, could prepare simple medicines with steady hands. Sarah had begun to believe they'd found their place, their way to honor the past while building a future. Then Thomas Hartley walked into the general store. She saw him before he saw her, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. He looked older, prosperity having added flesh to his frame. But those possessive eyes hadn't changed. She grabbed Samuel's hand, ready to flee, but it was too late. His gaze found her, widened in shock, then narrowed in something like triumph. "Sarah Morrison," he said, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "We thought you were dead." Every head turned. In a small village, drama was currency, and this promised to be rich. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Sarah said steadily. "I'm Sarah Delgado." "No." He stepped closer, and she saw Samuel tense, ready to protect his mother with his small body. "You're Sarah Morrison. Your father hired detectives. We searched for 2 years. His eyes dropped to Samuel, took in the dark hair, the brown skin, the Apache cheekbones. "Dear God, you kept it." The silence in the store was deafening. Sarah felt the careful fiction of years crumbling, but she lifted her chin, finding strength in her son's small hand in hers. "This is my son, Samuel. His father was my husband, Miguel Delgado." "Stop lying!" Thomas's face flushed red. "You were with those savages. This abomination is proof of what they did to you." "Mama," Samuel's voice was small, confused. "Why is the man angry?" Sarah knelt beside her son, ignoring Thomas, ignoring the staring crowd. "Because he doesn't understand. Mijo, some people fear what they don't understand." She stood, facing Thomas with all the dignity Itzachu had taught her. "Leave us alone. We have a life here. Your father deserves to know you're alive, that his grandson—" Thomas couldn't even finish the sentence. "I have no father," Sarah said flatly. No family but my son. If you have any decency, you'll leave and forget you saw us." But she could see in his face that he wouldn't. The story was too good. The scandal too rich. The ruined woman who'd chosen to keep her savage's child. He'd dine on this tale for years. After he left, promising he'd be back, the store remained silent. Then Doña Carmen, formidable in her black silk, stepped forward. "Sarah Delgado has been a good neighbor," she announced to the room. "A skilled healer, a devoted mother. I see no reason for that to change." She looked at each person in turn, her gaze carrying the weight of her influence. "Do any of you?" One by one, heads shook. The village had its own complicated history with truth and borders. They understood that sometimes survival required choosing your own name, your own story. But Sarah knew their reprieve was temporary. Thomas would return, possibly with her father, certainly with demands. The life she'd built here was ending, as surely as her life with the Apache had ended in gunfire. That night, she sat with Samuel under the stars, pointing out the constellations Chenchuk had shown her. "Are we going to run away?" her son asked, with the devastating directness of children. "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "Would that scare you?" Samuel considered this seriously. "No. You said Father's people moved with the seasons. Maybe we're supposed to move too." She pulled him close, this child who carried so much wisdom in such a small frame. "Maybe we are, little warrior. Maybe we are." But first, she had preparations to make. If they were going to run, they'd run towards something, not just away. And this time, she'd make sure her son understood exactly who he was and why that was worth protecting. The next morning, she began teaching him Apache in earnest, not just words, but the stories that carried a people's heart. If they had to leave this place, they'd carry their truth with them, a secret flame that no amount of running could extinguish. They didn't run after all. When Thomas returned with her father 2 weeks later, Sarah met them at her door with Samuel at her side and steel in her spine. The years had aged William Morrison, his hair gone gray, his face carved with lines of worry and whiskey. When he saw her, something broke in his weathered features. "Sarah," he whispered, "my girl." "Mr. Morrison," she replied formally, denying him the intimacy of father. His eyes dropped to Samuel, who stood straight and proud, every inch his father's son. Sarah watched her father take in the high cheekbones, the copper skin, the direct gaze that held no shame. To his credit, William didn't flinch. "This is my grandson." "This is my son, Samuel Morrison. His father was a good man who died protecting us." Thomas snorted. "A good man. He was a savage who—" "Choose your next words very carefully." Sarah interrupted, her hand moving to the knife always hidden in her skirts. "You stand at my door, in my village. Show respect or leave." William raised a hand, silencing Thomas. "Sarah, please, come home. Whatever happened, we can—" "I am home." She gestured to the small adobe house, the herb garden, the mountains rising beyond. "I have work here, purpose. My son has friends, school, a future. Living under a false name, hiding from your own family. Living free," she corrected, "making our own way." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Sarah held firm she would not return to Tucson, would not subject Samuel to a world that would see him only as evidence of shame. William, perhaps remembering his own wife's struggles in an unwelcoming land, eventually stopped pressing. "At least let me help," he said finally. "Financial support, for the boy's education." Sarah considered. Samuel was brilliant. The village teacher said he surpassed students years older. Money for proper schooling, books, opportunities. "Monthly deposits to the general store," she negotiated. "In the name of Sarah Delgado, no visits without invitation, no attempts to change our life here." William agreed, though she saw it cost him. Thomas left in disgust. But not before making his opinion clear. She was ruined, mad, raising an abomination. Sarah felt only relief watching him go. That door to her old life was closed forever now, and she was glad of it. What followed were years of careful balance. William's money, guilt-tinged but useful, allowed Sarah to expand her healing practice. She rented a small shop in the village center, combining a dispensary for herbal medicines with a lending library. Samuel helped after school, learning the properties of each plant, the preparation of tinctures and teas. "Why do we help people, Mama?" he asked one day while grinding dried sage. "Because healing is sacred work," she told him. "Your father's people knew this. My mother's people knew this. It's how we honor them, by passing on what they taught us." She taught him everything, not just the Apache knowledge, but the Mexican folk remedies the village women shared, the European herbs from her mother's books. He absorbed it all, creating his own synthesis, asking questions that showed a mind already working beyond traditional boundaries. At 10, Samuel spoke 4 languages fluently: English, Spanish, Apache, and Latin from the priest who recognized his gifts. He could track a deer through the forest, prepare medicines that actually worked, read everything from Virgil to Apache winter counts Sarah drew from memory. He was, as she'd hoped, a bridge between worlds. But bridges must be strong to bear the weight they carry. As Samuel grew, so did the challenges. Boys in the village sometimes taunted him for his mixed blood, calling him Indio with cruel intent. He came home one day with a split lip and skinned knuckles. "They said I don't belong anywhere," he told her, letting her clean his wounds. "Not Mexican, not white, not really Apache." Sarah's heart ached, remembering Chenchuk's words about belonging. "You belong to all and none," she said carefully. "That's not weakness, it's strength. You can walk in any world because you carry all of them within you." "Is that why we're different? Why you teach me things other mothers don't?" "Partly." She sat beside him, choosing her words. "But mostly because the world is changing. The old boundaries are breaking down. Whether people like it or not, you're not caught between worlds. Mijo, you're building a new one." Samuel considered this with his usual gravity, like father did when he chose you. "Yes," Sarah said softly, "exactly like that." As the seasons turned, Sarah watched her son grow into his heritage. He had Chenchuk's natural leadership, drawing other children to him despite or perhaps because of his differences. He had her determination, her refusal to accept limitations, but he also had something unique, an ability to see connections others missed, to blend traditions in ways that created something entirely new. When the village curandera grew too old to practice, she named Sarah as her successor, unprecedented for an outsider, but the results spoke louder than tradition. Sarah's clinic became a meeting place for healing knowledge, where indigenous women compared notes with Mexican midwives, where ancient remedies met modern techniques Samuel read about in medical journals from Santa Fe. "You're creating something important here," Doña Carmen told her one day, watching Samuel explain circulation to a group of fascinated children using both scientific terms and traditional metaphors. A new way of understanding. Sarah thought of Chenchuk's dream of preservation through adaptation. Perhaps this was how cultures survived, not by remaining frozen, but by finding new vessels for old wisdom. The test came when Samuel was 15. A fever swept through the village, deadly, fast-moving, resistant to standard treatments. The town doctor from the valley below threw up his hands. The priest administered last rites. Children began dying. Sarah and Samuel worked without sleep, combining every tradition they knew: Apache purification ceremonies, Mexican herbal treatments, European medical techniques Samuel had studied. They created a treatment that shouldn't have worked: willow bark tea prepared with Apache prayers, combined with a Mexican remedy for fever, administered using modern hygiene practices Samuel insisted on. It worked. Not for all, some were too far gone, but enough. The village children who survived did so because a white woman, an Apache Mexican boy, and the knowledge of conquered peoples had woven together something stronger than any single tradition could offer. The doctor from the valley came to study what they'd done. Dr. Marcus Webb, young and curious rather than hidebound, took careful notes as Samuel explained their process in precise medical terminology. "This is remarkable," Webb said. "You've essentially created a new treatment protocol. This should be published." "By whom?" Sarah asked dryly. "A woman with no formal medical training and her mixed-blood son." Webb flushed but didn't back down. "By me, if necessary, with full attribution to the actual discoverers. Medicine needs this kind of innovation." It was the beginning of a partnership that would shape Samuel's future. Webb became a regular visitor, teaching Samuel formal anatomy and diagnosis in exchange for learning traditional remedies. Under Webb's sponsorship, Samuel began correspondence courses in medicine, his natural gifts finally given proper framework. "I want to be a doctor," Samuel announced on his 17th birthday, a real doctor who also knows the old ways. Sarah felt Chenchuk's presence strongly in that moment, their son choosing to walk between worlds not as burden, but as calling. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Medical schools don't often accept Indians." Samuel smiled, his father's fierce pride shining through. "Then I'll be the first, or I'll find one that will." "Doctor, Webb says there are schools in California that care more about skill than bloodlines." Sarah pulled him close, this young man who'd grown taller than her but still sought her embrace. "Your father would be so proud." "Tell me about him," Samuel requested, as he still did sometimes. "Tell me about the night he asked you to be his wife." So she told him, as she'd told him countless times before, about choice and courage, about love that transcended boundaries, about the price of freedom and why it was worth paying. The story had become myth over the years, polished by retelling, but the heart remained true. "I'll make them both proud," Samuel promised. "Father and the baby who didn't make it. I'll be the bridge they died trying to build." Sarah believed him. This child who'd been born in storm and raised in secret had become exactly what she'd hoped, not Apache or Mexican or Anglo, but something new, something that honored all while being bound by none. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer fearsome. Samuel would leave for medical school soon, carrying with him knowledge that no institution could teach. He would face prejudice and obstacles, certainly, but he would also carry the strength of all his ancestors, Apache warriors and Mexican poets, frontier women and indigenous healers. And Sarah would continue her work, tending the flame of memory and medicine in this small mountain village. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd stood in the ashes of her father's ranch. She was Nadaya, keeper of words, guardian of stories that might otherwise be lost. Between them, mother and son had built something from the ruins of tragedy, not just survival, but transformation. Chenchush had dreamed of preservation through adaptation, in their own way, through herbs and healing, through education and integration. They'd made that dream real. The work would continue, the bridge would hold. The years passed like seasons in the desert, sometimes harsh, sometimes surprisingly gentle, always transformative. Sarah watched from her clinic window as the village changed around her. The railroad had come to the valley below, bringing new people, new ideas, new challenges. The old ways were fading like afternoon shadows, but in her small corner of the world, she kept them alive. Samuel had been gone for 4 years, studying at the University of California. His letters came regularly, filled with medical knowledge and barely contained excitement about new discoveries. He wrote of professors who'd initially doubted him, but now sought his input on cases involving traditional remedies. He wrote of classmates who'd become friends once they saw past his skin to his skill. He wrote of a young woman named Maria Santos, daughter of a Pueblo potter, who was studying to be a nurse. "She understands," he wrote, "about carrying multiple worlds inside, about being a bridge." Sarah smiled. recognizing the echo of young love in his careful words. Time was a circle, and her son was finding his own path to connection across boundaries. The clinic had expanded, with Samuel's success opening doors. Other mixed-blood youth sought her guidance. She taught them what she could, not just healing, but how to navigate between worlds with dignity and tact. Some went on to schools, armed with letters from Dr. Webb. Others stayed to learn the traditional ways before they vanished entirely. It was a warm autumn day when William Morrison appeared at her door for the last time. She hadn't seen him in 5 years, honoring their agreement. But she'd have recognized him anywhere despite how illness had ravaged his frame. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Consumption. Doctors say weeks, maybe days." Sarah guided him inside, her healer's eye confirming what he'd said. The disease had hollowed him out, leaving only will and regret. "Why come here?" "To say things that should have been said long ago," he coughed, spots of blood staining his handkerchief. "To tell you that I was wrong. About your mother. About you. About everything." She prepared him tea that would ease his breathing, habits of care stronger than old wounds. As he sipped, he spoke of the years after she'd left, his gradual understanding of what he'd lost, his pride in Samuel's achievements from afar, his growing respect for the choice she'd made. "Your mother tried to tell me," he wheezed, "that there were different ways to live, different ways to love. I was too afraid to listen." "Fear makes us all fools sometimes," Sarah said, thinking of her own journey from fear to freedom. William stayed 3 days. In that time, they found a kind of peace, not reconciliation exactly, but acknowledgement. He told her stories of her mother she'd never heard, tales of a woman who'd fought for her right to be different in a world that demanded conformity. Sarah told him about Chenchuk, about the Apache way of seeing the world, about how love could bloom even in violence and loss. On the last night, as his breathing grew labored, he asked, "Will you forgive me?" "I forgave you long ago," she said truthfully. "Hatred is too heavy to carry for long." He died at dawn, peacefully. Sarah buried him in the village cemetery, with words spoken in 4 languages: English for who he'd been, Spanish for where he'd died, Apache for the understanding that came too late, and Latin for the universal nature of human failing and redemption. Samuel came home for the funeral, bringing Maria. She was everything Sarah had hoped: intelligent, grounded, proud of her heritage while open to others, watching them together. Sarah saw the future taking shape. "We want to return here after graduation," Samuel told her. "Start a proper hospital, one that serves everyone: white, Mexican, Indian, one that honors all traditions." "The old doctor in town won't like competition," Sarah warned, though her heart sang at the prospect. "Then he'll have to adapt," Maria said with quiet steel. "The world is changing. Medicine needs to change with it." They were married the following spring in a ceremony that scandalized and delighted in equal measure. Apache blessings mixed with Catholic vows. Pueblo pottery held Mexican flowers, and Dr. Webb served as witness alongside Doña Carmen, the village priest. After much soul-searching, agreed to officiate, declaring that God surely smiled on love that built bridges. Their first child came with the winter snows, a daughter they named Ana Itza Chu Morrison Santos, carrying all their histories in her name. Sarah held her granddaughter and wept for all the grandparents who weren't there: Chenchuk, who'd died protecting their future; Itza Chu, who'd taught strength through endurance; her own mother, who'd planted seeds of rebellion in poetry and dreams. The hospital Samuel and Maria built became a model, drawing visits from doctors and officials curious about their integrated approach. Traditional healers worked alongside trained nurses. Apache purification ceremonies happened in rooms equipped with modern surgical tools. It shouldn't have worked, but it did, because at its heart was respect for knowledge, for tradition, for the fundamental humanity of all who sought healing. Sarah moved her clinic into the hospital, finally able to practice openly what she'd always done in shadows. At 60, her hair silver but her hands still steady, she taught a new generation the synthesis she'd created from necessity and love. The government officials came, of course. The new policies demanded Indian children be sent to boarding schools, stripped of language and culture. Samuel, now Dr. Morrison, stood against them with the law and influence, protecting the village children with paperwork and persuasion. When that failed, Sarah's old networks helped families disappear into the mountains until the officials gave up. "You can't hold back progress," one frustrated agent told Samuel. "Whose progress?" Samuel asked. "My mother preserved knowledge that saves lives. My wife creates pottery that museums beg to display. Our daughter speaks 5 languages and can set a broken bone or solve a mathematical equation with equal skill. That's progress. Your way offers only erasure." The world beyond their valley convulsed with change. Wars came and went. Territories became states. The frontier, as the newspapers called it, closed. But in their mountain village, something else opened possibility: plurality, the radical idea that strength came not from purity, but from mixture. Sarah's journal from this time, discovered later, revealed her inner thoughts. Today marks 35 years since Chenchuk asked me to ride with him. I was 20 then, certain of nothing except that the life planned for me was a slow death. I could never have imagined this a granddaughter learning Apache lullabies while studying biology. A son who heals with both surgeon's knife and sacred herbs. A community where difference is strength rather than shame. The losses remain my first child, my husband, his people scattered or destroyed. But from that destruction came creation, not replacement, but transformation. The Apache way survives not in reservation museums, but in living practice. Chenchush's dream of preservation through adaptation lives in every patient we heal, every child who learns their true history, every young person who refuses to choose between worlds. I am old now, my body wearing down like a well-used tool, but I am not afraid. I have kept my promises. The stories live, the knowledge endures, the bridge holds strong, as if her body had been waiting for permission. Sarah's health declined rapidly after her 70th birthday. She faced it with the same practical courage she'd shown all her life, teaching until her hands shook too much to demonstrate, speaking until her voice gave out, writing until the pen fell from her fingers. The end came on a night of the new moon, the same phase under which she'd married Chenchuk. Samuel and Maria were there, along with Anna and her younger siblings. The room filled with the scent of desert sage and pine, the soft sound of Apache songs mixing with Spanish prayers. "Tell them," Sarah whispered to Samuel. "All of it, the truth, not the comfortable story. Tell them about choice and consequence, about love that costs everything and gives more. Tell them—" Her voice faded, but her eyes remained fierce with purpose. "I'll tell them," Samuel promised. "Every word, every story, every truth." Sarah smiled then, that rare full smile that transformed her weathered face. In her final moments, she spoke in Apache words for Chenchush, for Itzachu, for the child who'd never breathed, for all the ghosts who'd walked with her through the years. Her last word was Tizna complete. They buried her as she'd instructed, not in the town cemetery, but in the old way, in a place where eagles circled and the winds sang through ancient stones. Samuel spoke the prayers in all the languages she'd taught him, while Anna played a song on the Apache flute her grandmother had carved for her. The stone they placed simply read, "Sarah Morrison Nada, keeper of words, builder of bridges, she chose." But her true monument was not stone. It was the hospital that treated all with equal dignity. It was the young people who walked proudly between worlds. It was the knowledge preserved and transformed, passed hand to hand and heart to heart. It was the radical idea that love could triumph over division, that choice could overcome circumstance, that from the ashes of one world, another could rise. In the end, she'd kept all her promises. The stars still held their Apache names. The plants still whispered their healing secrets. And somewhere in the space between worlds, a love that had begun with violence and silence endured, transformed but unbroken, a testament to the power of choosing your own path. The bridge held, the stories lived, the circle, at last, was complete. 50 years had passed since Sarah Morrison's burial. Anna Morrison Santos, now Dr. Anna Morrison Santos stood before a packed auditorium at the University of New Mexico. Her hair, silver-streaked like her grandmother's had been, was pulled back in a practical bun. In her hands, she held a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. "My grandmother," she began, "was called many things: captive, survivor, traitor, healer, but she called herself only one thing: a woman who chose." The audience, academics, students, members of various tribal nations, descendants of frontier families, listened with the intensity of those hungry for untold stories. Anna had fought for years to bring this moment about, to share Sarah's journals publicly, to challenge the comfortable narratives of the Old West. For decades, her story was twisted to fit acceptable patterns: the rescued white woman, the victim of savage captivity. Even those who meant well insisted on seeing her as damaged, broken by her experience. But her own words tell a different truth. Anna opened the journal, reading in her grandmother's careful script. "They ask me still if I was forced, if I was taken against my will. They cannot conceive that I looked at the man they called savage and saw salvation, that I looked at the life they called civilized and saw a cage. When Chen Chuk, my husband, my love, my equal, asked me to ride with him, he offered what my own world never had the freedom to choose who I would become." A murmur ran through the audience. Even now, in 1941, such words challenged deeply held beliefs about race, about women, about the settling of the West. "My grandmother's journals," Anna continued, "along with my father's medical notes and the oral histories we've collected, paint a picture of the frontier that differs dramatically from Hollywood's version, a place where boundaries blurred, where love transcended categories, where survival often meant synthesis rather than supremacy." She told them about the hospital, still operating, still blending traditional and modern medicine, about the network of families throughout the Southwest who preserved Apache, Pueblo, and Mexican traditions not in museums but in daily practice, about the children and grandchildren of mixed heritage who'd become doctors, teachers, artists, and leaders. "But this is not just a story of triumph," Anna warned. "It's also a story of loss, of the hundreds in Chen Chuk's band. My grandmother could account for fewer than 20 survivors, of languages silenced, ceremonies forbidden, entire ways of life systematically destroyed. My grandmother preserved what she could, but she knew it was fragments of a shattered whole." The controversy began immediately after Anna's presentation. Newspapers picked up the story, some celebrating it as a tale of love conquering prejudice, others condemning it as glorifying miscegenation. Academic debates raged about the authenticity of the journals, the reliability of memory, the politics of narrative. But in the mountains of New Mexico, in small villages throughout Arizona, in urban barrios and rural reservations, different conversations were happening. Families brought out their own hidden histories, great-grandmothers who'd been listed as Mexican but whispered Apache prayers, great-grandfathers whose blue eyes belied their fluent Navajo, children raised between worlds when such mixing was illegal or worse. Maria Delgado, a young anthropologist of Yaqui descent, came to study the Morrison Santos family archives. "Your grandmother," she told Anna, "gave us permission to exist, to be complex, to refuse the simple categories that were meant to contain us." The journal publication faced fierce resistance. Publishers worried about obscenity laws not for sexual content, but for the radical idea that a white woman had freely chosen an Apache man, had borne his children with pride rather than shame. Some tribal leaders questioned a white woman's right to speak of Apache traditions. Conservative groups condemned the glamorization of race mixing. But Anna persisted, finding allies in unexpected places. Black scholars from Howard University saw parallels with their own hidden histories. Jewish immigrant families recognized the strategies of survival through adaptation. Mexican-American activists claimed Sarah as one of their own, a woman who'd built identity from choice rather than accepting it as destiny. The first edition sold out in weeks. Despite, or perhaps because of attempts to ban it in several states, letters poured in from across the country. From a teacher in Oklahoma, "My grandmother was Creek, my grandfather German, their marriage was illegal, their children officially illegitimate." Reading Sarah's words, I finally understand their courage. From a veteran in California, "I served alongside Apache scouts in the Great War. They saved my life more than once. This book tells the truth about their honor that history tried to erase." From a housewife in Texas, "I was raised to fear and hate Indians. This story made me question everything I thought I knew. How many other truths have we buried?" But perhaps the most significant response came from the Apache themselves. Thomas Kinzuma, a tribal historian from San Carlos, wrote, "Sarah Morrison was not Apache. She could never fully be Apache, but she was something perhaps more important, a witness who refused to let our stories die. In a time when our own children were stolen and forbidden their language, she preserved and transmitted what she could. Perfect, no. Complete, never. But in the desert of cultural genocide, even imperfect preservation was an act of resistance." Hollywood, inevitably, came calling. They wanted to make a movie Captive Heart or Desert Rose or some such nonsense. Anna refused them all, knowing how the story would be twisted. The Apache would become noble savages. Sarah, a helpless maiden. Chenchuch, a brooding anti-hero who conveniently died to make way for a white husband. The complex truth would be simplified into comfortable lies. Instead, Anna worked with Maria Delgado and a collective of indigenous filmmakers to create a documentary series. They interviewed elders who remembered Sarah, filmed at the still-functioning hospital, traced the diaspora of Chenchuch's band through descendants across the Southwest. The most powerful moment came when they found Robert Kawin, grandson of the woman who died in the massacre. He'd preserved a piece of beadwork his grandmother had been making for Sarah's expected child unfinished, blood-stained, but carefully kept through generations. "My family hated whites for what was done," he said on camera. "But grandmother's sister, who survived, told us about the white woman who chose to be one of us, who bore our chief's child, who kept our medicines alive when it was illegal to practice them. Hatred is too heavy to carry forever. Maybe it's time to honor the bridges along with mourning the burnt ground." The series won awards, sparked discussions, changed some minds, but, more importantly, it inspired others to share their own hidden histories. A movement grew not to romanticize the past or minimize its brutalities, but to complicate the simple stories, to restore agency to those written as victims, to celebrate the secret survivals and stubborn syntheses that had always existed at the margins. Anna established the Morrison Chenchuch Foundation, using proceeds from the book to fund scholarships for indigenous medical students, to support traditional healers, to document endangered knowledge. The hospital in New Mexico became a pilgrimage site of sorts, not for miracle cures, but for the radical idea that healing could honor all traditions without being imprisoned by any. In her final years, Anna often sat in her grandmother's garden, now part of the hospital grounds. The same herbs grew there: Apache tea, Mexican marigolds, European chamomile, all thriving together in the high desert soil. Medical students would find her there, eager to hear first-hand stories of the woman who'd chosen love over safety, truth over comfort. She wasn't a saint. Anna would always clarify. She was difficult, stubborn, sometimes wrong. She couldn't save Chenchuch or their first child or the Apache way of life. She appropriated as much as she preserved, shaped by her time even as she defied it. But she chose. In a world that offered women few choices, she created her own. The last entry in Sarah's journal, which Anna would read to close every lecture, seemed to speak across the decades. I am asked if I regret the path I chose. How can I regret the love that made me whole? How can I regret the children who carry forward what others would destroy? How can I regret the knowledge preserved, the lives saved, the bridges built? Yes, there was pain, such pain as I could never have imagined in my safe white world. Yes, there was loss, my husband, my child, a way of life as beautiful as it was doomed. But there was also joy, purpose, connection across every boundary they told me was sacred. I was Sarah Morrison, dutiful daughter. I became Nada, keeper of words. I was both. I was neither. I was myself, finally and fully, in all my complex truth. They say I was captured. They are right, captured by love, by choice, by the terrible, beautiful freedom of stepping outside the story written for me. I wish such capture for every woman, every soul brave enough to choose their own becoming. The men who killed my husband thought they were ending a story. They were wrong. They were beginning it. Every mixed child born proud. Every traditional medicine remembered. Every boundary crossed in love rather than conquest. All of these are Chenchuk's victory, his survival, his revenge against those who would make the world small. I go to my grave unrepentant. Let that be my epitaph. She chose, she chose, she chose. As the 20th century wore on, Sarah Morrison's story took its place in the complex tapestry of American history, no longer hidden, no longer simplified, no longer comfortable. It stood as testament to the power of individual choice in systems designed to eliminate choice, to the persistence of love in landscapes of hate, to the possibility of building bridges even as others burned them. In universities and reservation schools, in barrio clinics and suburban reading groups, her words echoed, "Your heart is learning to be Apache, not appropriation but appreciation. Not conquest, but connection. Not purity, but synthesis." The frontier, it turned out, had never really closed. It had simply moved inward, to the contested territories of the heart, where every generation must choose anew between fear and freedom, between the safety of separation and the dangerous joy of choosing to belong to each other. Well, Sarah Morrison had made her choice in 1882, standing in the ashes of her father's ranch. The reverberations of that choice continued, rippling outward like rings in still water, touching shores she never could have imagined. Thank you for listening to this story of the Wild West, of love that transcended all boundaries, and of choices that echo through generations. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world Sarah and Chenchuk's story has reached. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about their incredible journey. Your stories and perspectives make our community richer, just as Sarah's choice to embrace a different path enriched the world she lived in.